Hello and welcome to my horoscope video for the full moon in Pisces for the earth signs. Starting off with Taurus here. Taurus has you've got the 5th house and the 11th house lit up by this full moon, which is fairly positive, seeing as the 5th house was the house of good fortune and the 11th house was the house of good spirit. So the 5th house, typically we talk about it in terms of children as well as creative pursuits, what you do for fun and stuff like that. And with Mercury well dignified in that house, it's a good time really for anything that falls in those categories. So if you're a parent, then things to do with looking after your kids would be highlighted. Otherwise, I often think about it as like if you're birthing a creative project, as if that creative project is your kind of baby that you're bringing into this world and trying to give it what it needs to thrive or whatever. Or it could just be, kind of expressing yourself and enjoying that kind of fun in that way. If you're dating too, the 5th house could also be, that kind of that courtship kind of period, or having fun with friends or something like that. Yeah, that's the 11th house has to do with basically the support you have to sort of reach your goals and ambitions in life. So there's something. It's a nice full moon for Taurus in that sense, because it really highlights the sort of the creative potential and what's coming together to support you and that kind of stuff. However, I mean, it's not all totally easy though, because you've got that Mars there in the 12th house. Then you're going to have a long Mars retrograde in the 12th house, starting around September 9th. It's just kind of slowing down to go retrograde. Now, Mars has already kind of made a pass where it's like squaring all these planets in Capricorn. It's kind of interesting when you look at the 12th house and you look at the 9th house. This is what we call cadent houses. And it's sort of like where the 11th houses are kind of the what's getting hit off by the full moon. Is that's what's like what's supporting you, right? The fun, the good times, the creativity, and that kind of like tuning to that to help you reach your goals and stuff. However, the 12th house and the 9th house is sort of more of like the kind of open spaces where there's time for pause and reflection, or when things are kind of like not really in your control, or not really, you just kind of have to, adapt with the circumstances maybe. The 9th house has to do with higher learning, and it's a pretty stacked lineup. However, it's getting a lot of tension from that square to Mars there. The 12th house is kind of like getting in trouble, things kind of going out of control, and with Mars there could be some fiery outbursts, maybe some like temper tantrums, some bad moods and stuff like that. But I think ultimately, one of the things that we're looking at here is this isn't just something that's just going away tomorrow. These are kind of long, difficult, slow grind of a dynamic that's happening. And like if you're what ultimately, I think Saturn is in pretty good dignity in the 9th, and Mars is in pretty good dignity in the 12th. And Mars is like the rebellious fighter planet. It wants to just sort of like it's like throwing a temper tantrum and making a big fuss about all the kind of difficulties and stuff like that. But ultimately, I think there's with Saturn, it's the planet to do with maturity and taking what comes from like some of the hardest lessons that you go through is really what kind of builds character and what you gain maturity from. And I think that is kind of like setting the tone for the rest of the year, really. And it's like if you're not getting, if you're not making any progress with that now in terms of really like seeing what it is that Saturn's trying to teach you in your ninth house there, it's like you'll have the rest of the year to really sort of like get that download. And what can you learn from the kind of the way we go into a temper tantrum or really rebel or flare up against these like the tough circumstances, or when things aren't really going our way. You see, that kind of stuff is gonna that's there's kind of two things going on at once here, which is kind of interesting. One, which is maybe more, more about it's a good time for playing and having fun and expressing yourself and stuff like that. But in the, in the background, there's sort of like this like harder lesson kind of coming through that is not, you may not get it immediately. But maybe, maybe it's things like, like by expressing yourself or getting in tune with your creative side, you can kind of start to like, do some work out the kinks around that kind of stuff, maybe, right? Venus is in the third house, and Venus is in an interesting position because it sextiles that Mercury in the fifth. So the third house has to do with like your neighborhood, your siblings, communication, writing, using tools with your hands and stuff. So there could be like an emphasis on creativity, either with language and writing and poetry, or building things with your hands and tools and stuff like that. And with that, Venus is coming into a direct opposition with that Saturn in the ninth. And that maybe it's sort of like, maybe by giving yourself something to do, by giving yourself to apply with your skills, your hands, and keeping yourself busy, and then like maybe something in the can kind of work itself out in the background in the subconscious mind, and like that can kind of like click in, like you can start to like get that influence of all that ninth house stuff kind of like playing off your third to ninth dynamic, ninth being kind of like higher lessons or spiritual insights. It could also do with studying and stuff like that too. If you are, it could also be if you're learning things in school or something like that, how do you apply that in a more like everyday life kind of way? Like maybe if you're learned some sort of new technique or something like that in your craft, whatever that is, like how do you actually apply that technique? That could be something else that comes up through this, maybe. Skipping ahead a whole month here. Okay, what am I doing now? Let's go on to Virgo. Okay, so so Virgo is interesting because you've got Mercury now in good dignity in the first, and that's opposing the moon there in the seventh house. So, I mean, the seventh house is usually a relationship house. It also would have to do with, like, good friends, or if you're a professional and you're working with clients, it could have to do with your clients. And there's something about the seventh house, which is like the basic relationship between self and other, right? So I think that there's something where with Mercury here in the first house, it's like you getting yourself together. I think there's something that's a lot. Virgo kind of reminds me of something about like kind of cleaning up and this sort of like self-care kind of thing, making the kind of tweaks or the adjustments that you need to be well and stuff like that. And then when you're going out there and you're experiencing the world, whether that's through professional client relationships or whether that's through romantic love relationships or with friends, or however you're primarily experiencing this relation to the other in your life, then the full moon really reflects something there. And sometimes I think what we see in the other is kind of like the reflection of our own shadow, really, right? Because it's like, and Virgo has something about like it kind of wants Virgo is known sometimes to be a bit secretive, like to sometimes hide the things that are more unpleasant and kind of sweep it under the rug, or else maybe like in this sense it could be coming out, projected onto somebody else, maybe, right? Um, so it's just important when to just be careful of when we're critical of other people. That's another Virgo stereotype, is Virgo can be very critical, is to maybe like what Carl Jung said was that the things that irritate us the most in other people are really just the things that we can't accept about ourselves. And that's something that maybe comes to mind here for Virgo around this full moon. Um, there's if you look at some other dynamics happening, you've got um, Mars in the eighth house, which is squaring both Venus in the 11th and that Capricorn lineup in the fifth. So the eighth house has to do with debts, inheritances, dependencies, and stuff like that. And Mars has this characteristic of kind of splitting away or trying to it's a severing, splitting kind of thing. So it's like I kind of see this as like, for example, if it's like a Virgo parent and like maybe the children, which would be fifth house, are dependent, have a degree of dependency, there could be a dynamic going on of trying to like sever the ties of dependency with the children, maybe. Or it could be, if like I said, there's other ways to look at the fifth house too. um but in this sense, it's kind of funny. I mean, with Virgo right now, the fifth house has Saturn in Capricorn and Jupiter in its fall. And it's sort of like, I noticed one thing in these kinds of charts is that the houses that get the Saturn signs typically tend to be more difficult houses. So when Virgo has a Saturn ruled fifth house, it's not necessarily the house that has to do with fun. Like what characterizes fun to a Virgo? Like, I don't know, what's Saturn in Capricorn? Like doing spreadsheets or something? Or like, let's get everything organized. I don't know. Like it's not really the most fun kind of like thing to begin with. And then what you've got here is you've got the big heavy Capricorn kind of lineup, and that's being squared off by Mars, which is probably just getting like fed up with it and wanting a change, wanting something different, but is stuck in this sort of situation where it's squaring off against this sort of not so fun business of the fifth house there. The ninth house, you've got Venus in Cancer Venus in Cancer in the 11th house, sorry. And that is in a direct opposition to Saturn there. So Cancer being more kind of about like warm, emotional, kind of comforting, supportive stuff, kind of going off against this kind of cold and dry, down to business Saturn in the fifth house, and also squaring off against Mars there in the eighth. I mean, it's like Venus is after something and is in a challenging situation where it's hard to get it. The 11th house is generally what your dreams and goals and the supports and help you have to move forward and do what you want to do in life, but it's sort of like coming up against some major obstacles, but Venus is still a helping planet. So I think like it could be a time, like if you have people where you go to talk to for advice or support, or maybe like a counselor, or if you're into that life coach stuff, it'd be, if you have people that they're there to support you, it would be you may not have the immediate solution, but it's at least a time where you can kind of really get in there and address some of the tensions and problems that are coming up. And I think it would be a fruitful time to do so. And with that, especially with that first and seventh house thing happening with the full moon, it would kind of bring in this thing about you probably gain more kind of self awareness through having that mirroring relationship of like kind of sitting down with somebody and like talking it out kind of thing. I think that's kind of one of the things that I see around this kind of full moon for Virgo here. Um, Now, I'll move on here to Capricorn. Okay. So Capricorn, the full moon is happening. The moon is in the third house. The sun and Mercury is in the ninth house. So the third house has to do with the local neighborhood, your siblings, communication, your daily life, working with your hands. The ninth house is more of like the higher learning. You've also got this big lineup in the first house of like the Jupiter, Pluto, Saturn kind of thing, which is a bit heavy going on right now. And that's being squared by something in the fourth house. So it's kind of like this, like if you're looking at what's going strong right now, as in being like well dignified and in a harmonious kind of position, the ninth house with that Mercury in the ninth house, it it is, if whether that is coming through as maybe taking some time out to go to do some, whether that's academic studies or like taking some time off work to go back to school, finish off a degree or something. Or it could be if you're having some kind of like more spiritual inspiration coming through during these times, that could be it as well too. What's interesting is that the Lord of the first house is Saturn, and Saturn is right there in the first house, and that's getting a nice trine to Mercury in the ninth. So it could be actually a really good time for some personal insights, like becoming more self awareness, but not just that, but kind of like a kind of like some kind of a message coming across, like that when you get a kind of a confirmation from the gods above or some sort of like something, like the Mercury is the messenger god, right? So it's sort of like that kind of eureka moment, or something just clicks in that you just weren't understanding before. Like you like grokking it, right? That idea where you deeply just kind of get something, right? I can kind of see that coming up from this one. And I mean, but the kind of the focus here, like earth signs like Capricorn are usually more kind of materially focused, and there's some kind of a material lesson coming through with that Mercury and Virgo. But the ninth house is going to be a little bit more, more of like the what's the big moral of the story or something. It's gonna be not I wouldn't imagine it being more so like this, the practical how do you do this kind of thing. But it could be, maybe it comes through as like a sudden insight or something like that makes the whole difference in a practical way, and that could have chain reactions and stuff like that. If you look at Venus is there in the seventh house. So there's something with relationships that's really being brought into focus right now, and we've got that harmonious sextile between Venus and Mercury. So if there's some kind of message that's coming through, that it could also be tied up with your relationships, right? And there could be that this kind of dynamic tension with that Saturn opposite Venus. Like it could be problems especially if you're in relationship. There could be problems in relationships coming up right now, but those problems are really there to just kind of like show you what it is you need to see right now. And it's a nice opportunity with the full moon, especially because if the moon itself is in a whole sign trine to that Venus too. So like with the third house to do with communication, maybe like really sitting down and having a good chat with your partner or something, and having some kind of a message just really come through, like the ray of light beaming out of the clouds or something like that, with the Mercury, the messenger, and the trumpet sounding, or something like that. The Mars, however, is in the fourth house, and there's a square here between Mars in the fourth and that Venus in the seventh. So there could be some kind of tension around home life and relationships. So there's certain questions of like, are you living with your partner? Are you living in different places? And that's also setting off with the first house with that big T square there too. So there could be, like, how are you getting along with if you're not with a partner? How are you getting along with your roommates? What's the deal with the landlord? How's your finances in terms of like paying for rent and stuff like that? And these are all, or it could also have to do, the fourth house has to do with family stuff. So there could be some sort of family tensions that might be putting some stress on the relationship as well in one direction or another. Or if you want to get all psychological about it, maybe there's some ancestral karma or developmental stuff with the family to look at there too. And again, that's going to be something of a part of a long drawn out process with Mars, as the Mars retrograde is just slowing down to go retrograde right now. So this is sort of my kind of meandering ramble through the earth signs. Hopefully you got something good out of it. Thanks for watching.